Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps the channel grow and allows us to continue producing investigative documentaries like this one. The Jeffrey Epstein case is often described as one of the most disturbing scandals of the modern era. According to court records and media investigations, Epstein was a wealthy financier whose connections extended into politics, business, and high society. For years, rumors circulated about his private life, but many of those allegations remained outside public scrutiny until legal proceedings forced the story into the open. What makes this case unusual is not only the accusations themselves, but the network of powerful individuals reportedly connected to Epstein. Flight logs, legal testimonies, and investigative journalism have raised questions about how someone with such serious allegations surrounding him was able to operate for so long without facing meaningful consequences. Some observers argue that this reflects systemic failures within legal and political institutions, while others caution against drawing conclusions without verified evidence. Court documents indicate that multiple victims accused Epstein of trafficking and exploitation. These accusations led to criminal investigations and eventual prosecution. His 2019 arrest brought global attention to a case that many believed had previously been minimized or ignored. Media outlets began re examining older reports, and journalists uncovered a complex timeline involving plea deals, legal immunity controversies, and questions about prosecutorial decisions. The controversy deepened following Epstein's death in custody, which was officially ruled a suicide. The circumstances surrounding his death generated widespread skepticism and fueled numerous theories. While authorities maintained their official conclusion, public distrust intensified due to surveillance failures and procedural irregularities reported at the facility where he was held. It is important to distinguish between documented facts and speculation. The Epstein case sits at the intersection of verified criminal proceedings and public suspicion, creating an environment where truth and rumor often become entangled. For investigators, journalists, and observers alike, the challenge has been separating evidence from narrative. As investigations expanded, journalists began examining how Epstein originally accumulated his wealth. Despite presenting himself as a financial strategist, public records reveal surprisingly little clarity about the exact mechanisms behind his fortune. This lack of transparency became a central question in media coverage. Some analysts suggested that Epstein's power came less from finance and more from access. Access to influential circles, elite institutions, and individuals positioned at the highest levels of society. Photographs, guest logs, and testimonies placed numerous public figures in proximity to Epstein over the years. It is important to note that association alone does not imply criminal involvement. Many individuals who appeared in records denied any knowledge of illegal activity. However, the repeated appearance of powerful names intensified public curiosity and suspicion. The case became less about one individual and more about the environment that allowed him to thrive. Legal experts pointed to the controversial 2008 plea agreement as a turning point. That agreement, negotiated behind closed doors, allowed Epstein to serve a reduced sentence despite serious federal allegations. The decision triggered criticism from prosecutors, advocacy groups, and later from federal investigators who questioned whether victims had been adequately informed. This moment is often cited as evidence of institutional failure rather than conspiracy. It exposed weaknesses in how wealth and influence can shape legal outcomes. Victim testimonies later brought renewed attention to the psychological dimension of the case. Many described systems of manipulation, coercion, and silence. These accounts shifted the narrative away from abstract scandal and toward human impact. The story was no longer about elite circles alone. It was about survivors seeking recognition and accountability. Meanwhile, public reaction transformed the case into a cultural flashpoint. Social media amplified both verified information and unverified claims at unprecedented speed. The line between investigation and speculation blurred. Documentaries, articles, and online communities attempted to reconstruct the timeline, sometimes responsibly, sometimes recklessly. This environment created a paradox. More information became available than ever before, yet certainty felt increasingly distant. The Epstein case demonstrates how modern scandals evolve in the digital age. Legal processes unfold slowly, but public judgment forms instantly. Evidence is examined alongside rumor, and audiences are left to navigate a landscape where truth competes with narrative. The result is not just a criminal case, but a study in how power, media, and perception interact. As federal investigations continued, the focus gradually shifted beyond Epstein himself and toward the broader systems surrounding him. Law enforcement agencies faced growing pressure to determine whether his operation involved additional participants or facilitators. Prosecutors reviewed financial records, communications, and travel histories in an effort to understand the scale of the network. While some materials were sealed due to ongoing legal sensitivity, the process revealed how complex and interconnected elite social circles can become. At the same time, the legal system confronted a second challenge: public trust. Many observers believed the case symbolized a deeper imbalance between ordinary citizens and individuals with extreme wealth. This perception did not emerge from the Epstein case alone, but it crystallized around it. Analysts argue that the scandal functioned as a mirror, reflecting anxieties about accountability, power, and institutional transparency. The media response intensified this effect. Investigative journalists revisited earlier reporting that had been dismissed or underexplored years before. Some outlets acknowledged that the story had once received limited attention, despite serious allegations. This retrospective scrutiny forced news organizations to examine their own role in shaping public awareness. The question was no longer only what happened, but why it took so long to become widely visible. Meanwhile, court proceedings related to associated individuals continued to unfold in separate cases. Each development reignited debate about responsibility and due process. Legal experts emphasized a critical principle: every accusation must be tested within the framework of evidence and trial. Public opinion, while powerful, cannot replace judicial procedure. This tension between emotional reaction and legal standards became a defining feature of the case. For survivors, the legal timeline often felt painfully slow. Many advocates stressed that justice is not measured only in verdicts, but in acknowledgement. Support networks expanded, and conversations about exploitation, power dynamics, and institutional silence gained global traction. The Epstein case therefore extended beyond a single scandal. It contributed to a wider cultural reckoning about abuse, credibility, the structures that enable secrecy. In the end, the story remains unfinished. not because facts are unknowable, but because large investigations unfold over years, not headlines. What the case ultimately represents may depend less on final verdicts and more on the reforms it inspires. If institutions change, transparency increases, and protections strengthen, then the legacy of the scandal may become one of correction rather than collapse. Over time, the Epstein case evolved into more than a criminal investigation. It became a lens through which society examined its relationship with power and privilege. The central question was no longer limited to one individual. It expanded into a broader inquiry. How do systems respond when wealth, access, and influence collide with accountability? Sociologists observe that scandals of this scale often expose structural weaknesses rather than isolated wrongdoing. Institutional blind spots rarely emerge overnight. They develop gradually through habits of deference, silence, and convenience. The Epstein case forced institutions to confront whether influence had softened scrutiny and whether certain circles operated under different expectations of consequence. Legal scholars highlighted another dimension: the importance of due process in emotionally charged cases. Public outrage can demand immediate answers, but legal frameworks exist to prevent judgment without evidence. This tension is uncomfortable yet essential. A justice system must remain slow, methodical, and evidence driven precisely when public pressure is strongest. If it fails under pressure, it sets a precedent that extends far beyond a single case. The cultural aftermath of the scandal revealed how deeply modern societies depend on transparency. Digital media has made secrecy harder to maintain, yet it has also created environments where speculation spreads faster than verified fact. This dual reality defines contemporary investigations. Information is abundant, but trust remains fragile. The public must navigate between skepticism and responsibility, learning to question without abandoning reason. For many observers, the lasting impact of the Epstein case may lie in its warning. It demonstrates how power can concentrate quietly, how networks can operate in shadows, and how difficult it can be to untangle truth once secrecy becomes normalized. But it also shows the corrective capacity of exposure. Once attention intensifies, systems are forced to respond. Reform becomes possible only after visibility. The case does not offer simple conclusions. It offers a mirror. It asks whether societies are willing to examine the structures they build and whether they are prepared to strengthen them when cracks appear. Scandals end, cases close, but the institutional lessons remain, and those lessons determine whether future abuses are prevented or repeated. In the end, the Epstein case may be remembered less for its headlines and more for the questions it left behind. Scandals of this magnitude do not simply fade. They linger as markers in cultural memory, reminding societies that power without scrutiny inevitably drifts toward abuse. The true measure of such events is not outrage in the moment, but reflection afterward. History shows that institutions rarely transform because they choose to. They transform because they are forced to. When public trust erodes, reform becomes survival. Transparency is no longer optional, it becomes structural necessity. The Epstein case accelerated this pressure. It exposed vulnerabilities in legal systems, media ecosystems, and public perception all at once. Yet the story is not solely about failure, it is also about response. Survivors spoke and were heard. Journalists persisted where earlier coverage had stalled. Courts reopened conversations once considered closed. Each of these actions demonstrates a counterforce to corruption: visibility. When hidden systems are illuminated, they lose their protection. Secrecy depends on darkness. Attention dissolves it. The broader lesson extends beyond a single name or case. It concerns how modern societies negotiate truth in an age of overwhelming information. The challenge is not only to uncover facts, but to interpret them responsibly. Skepticism must exist alongside discipline. Curiosity must exist alongside evidence. Without that balance, public discourse collapses into noise, and noise protects the very systems it claims to challenge. What remains is a choice faced repeatedly across history: whether to treat scandals as temporary spectacles or structural warnings. One path leads to forgetting, the other leads to reform. The difference is measured not in headlines, but in policy, in oversight, in cultural expectation. Cases end, documents close. But the architecture of accountability is never finished. It must be rebuilt continuously, reinforced by vigilance rather than outrage alone. If the Epstein scandal leaves a legacy, it may be this reminder: justice is not a moment, it is a maintenance process. And societies that neglect maintenance eventually confront collapse of trust. The final question is not what happened. The record will continue to clarify over time. The final question is what changes because it happened. That answer is written not by courts alone, but by collective memory. And collective memory decides whether history becomes repetition or progress.